The stranger knocked at 4:17 on my 36th birthday, carrying a white envelope with a green certified mail label and a signature scanner. My entire family had forgotten the date. The man at my door wore a postal jacket darkened by rain, apologized for the late route, and asked me to confirm that I was Elena Morris. Inside the envelope was a notice from the estate of June Holloway, my high school English teacher, naming me beneficiary of the brick house on Sycamore Street, and requesting that I attend a probate appointment the next morning. I signed the scanner with a plastic stylus attached by a coiled cord. The carrier checked my identification because the letter required restricted delivery. His badge said Samuel Price. He knew nothing about the contents, yet he treated my name as something that had to reach the correct person, rather than a detail relatives could manage for me. The tracking history showed 2 earlier delivery attempts had gone to my parents' house. Both were returned. The first envelope was marked moved, address unknown, in handwriting I recognized as my cousin Valerie's. The second carried the same notation and an additional line asking that future estate mail be routed through her. I had lived in the apartment above the library annex for 7 years. My address appeared on my driver's license, voter registration, payroll records, library website biography, holiday cards, and every family group message announcing where children should send fundraiser orders. Valerie had mailed a graduation invitation to that apartment 3 months earlier. The certified envelope contained a copy of June's will, a photograph of the Sycamore Street house, and a letter from attorney Miriam Cole. A smaller cream envelope was sealed separately. On the front, June had written, "For Elena's next birthday, whether I am there or not." I did not open the birthday note immediately. I read the legal notice first, because years in public library acquisitions had trained me to locate dates, obligations, and missing material before emotion reorganized the page. June had left me the house and its contents, subject to estate administration, debts, taxes, and a request, not a legal condition, that I consider continuing the neighborhood reading room she had operated from the front parlor. Miriam's letter asked whether anyone had represented that I could not be located. It said she had delayed discussing estate details through relatives because none had demonstrated authority to accept notice for me. She requested that I preserve the envelope and tracking information. At 4:31, my family group chat remained silent. No birthday cake photograph. No message from my mother saying she had been busy. No joke from my younger brother Cody asking how old I was pretending to be. The tracking page on my phone documented that someone outside the family had tried 3 times to reach me, while the people who knew my address allowed the first 2 attempts to return. Samuel waited beneath the porch light while I checked whether another signature was required. Rain tapped the metal awning. I thanked him for making the 3rd attempt. He said he was covering a route for a carrier on medical leave, and had noticed the address correction attached by the local post office after the estate requested verification. Then he returned to the white truck idling at the curb. The certified envelope became the first piece of mail I had received in years that contained no request for me to solve something. It carried a responsibility, but the responsibility came with information, authority, and a choice. My family's messages usually arrived as questions whose answers were already assigned. Could I proofread a college essay tonight? Could I find a hotel near the hospital? Could I order the book a grandchild needed by Friday? Could I remind everyone when Sunday dinner moved? My father used to call me the family calendar. He meant it as praise. Over time, it meant no one else needed to remember dates because I would. I ordered Mom's birthday flowers, scheduled Dad's retirement dinner, tracked Cody's children's school events, and reminded Valerie about our aunt's surgery. My own birthday lived in the same system until I stopped sending the reminder. That year I conducted an experiment I never announced. I did not mention the date. I did not organize a dinner. I did not ask the library staff to circulate a card. I wanted to know whether anyone remembered me without being prompted by me. By 4:17, the answer had arrived in a postal truck. I worked in acquisitions for the Cedar County Public Library System in Missouri, selecting, ordering, licensing, cataloging, replacing, and sometimes withdrawing materials across 4 branches. My office contained padded mailers, invoice carts, advance copies, rolls of barcode labels, and a window that leaked during wind-driven rain. The public saw shelves. I saw the infrastructure required to keep those shelves responsive to actual readers. I knew which neighborhood needed more bilingual picture books, which branch had a waiting list for welding manuals, and which digital license became unaffordable after a publisher changed terms. I tracked damaged shipments, duplicate invoices, expired subscriptions, and requests handwritten by children whose spelling was still forming. My job was attention distributed through systems. My flaw was usefulness without disclosure. I solved problems and concealed the cost until resentment surprised everyone, including me. If Cody needed help completing a school financial aid form for his daughter, I stayed up until midnight and later said it was no trouble. If Mom changed Sunday dinner at the last minute, I rearranged work and arrived smiling. I believed unadvertised generosity was morally cleaner. I did not notice that invisible labor trains people to experience the result as natural. At 36, I lived alone, volunteered twice a week at an after-school reading club, and had stopped explaining why marriage was not the measure of adulthood. My family described me as independent, with the tone people use for a household appliance that requires little maintenance. I was included in every emergency and overlooked in every calculation of who might need care. June Holloway first noticed me when I was 16. I returned a library copy of Jane Eyre, repaired with transparent tape, after the cover detached in my backpack. I expected a fine. June, who taught English at my high school and volunteered at the branch on Thursdays, showed me how transparent tape became brittle and damaged paper. She brought out wheat paste, Japanese tissue, and a bone folder from a small repair kit. We spent 40 minutes mending the hinge. She did not praise me for trying. She taught me to repair it correctly. That distinction formed our friendship. June stayed after school while I completed scholarship applications my parents considered unrealistic. Dad believed state college was sensible, and anything farther away was vanity. Mom worried application fees would be wasted. June helped me request waivers, revise essays, and compare aid packages. When I received a library science scholarship, she mailed the acceptance copy to herself by certified mail because she said important proof deserved a second route. The line sounded eccentric at 16. At 36, holding her estate notice, I understood it as a philosophy. I attended a university 3 hours away and returned to Cedar County after graduate school. A larger library in St. Louis offered me an acquisitions position with higher pay. I declined because our local system was expanding an after-school program and because June's eyesight had begun failing. I did not tell June the full salary difference. I did not want my decision to become a debt she believed she had to repay. Every Saturday, I visited Sycamore Street. We sorted books, entered tax receipts, labeled medication bottles in larger print, and drank cinnamon tea in the front room. June offered me the spare bedroom whenever she worried my apartment was too small. I refused because accepting housing would blur our friendship with financial dependence. I never asked about her will. The house had red brick, deep windowsills, a brass mailbox, and floor-to-ceiling shelves built by June's late husband, Martin. After he died, she opened the front room to neighborhood children from 3 until 6 on weekdays. There was no formal nonprofit. Parents signed emergency cards. Retired teachers volunteered. June bought used books, accepted donations, and kept crackers in metal tins. Children called it Miss June's Reading House. They came for homework help, quiet internet, or the simple fact that an adult expected them to return. June believed an American neighborhood could change through one porch, one shelf, and a door kept open after school. She bought the house with Martin in 1979. He worked for the electric cooperative and built shelves during weekends. Their only child died in infancy. June rarely discussed that loss directly. The reading room became neither replacement nor memorial. It was the form attention took after grief stopped requiring explanation. My cousin Valerie began helping June with errands after I changed work schedules and could visit only on Saturdays. Valerie was socially efficient. She knew pharmacy technicians, real estate agents, church secretaries, and which cousin could move furniture on short notice. Older relatives experienced her speed as devotion. At first, I appreciated the help. Valerie delivered groceries on Tuesdays and drove June to 2 eye appointments I could not attend. She posted photographs of them at lunch and wrote captions about caring for the women who cared for us. June disliked social media but tolerated it because Valerie brought peach pie. The change began with small acts. Valerie moved June's medication list into a folder she kept in her car. She replaced the emergency contact card on the refrigerator and removed my number. When I restored it, Valerie said too many contacts confused first responders. She began speaking for June during appointments, finishing sentences before June could find a word. June remained mentally sharp. Her eyesight and balance declined. Valerie treated physical dependence as evidence that decision-making should transfer. Family members accepted the substitution because it looked like care. On April 12, 2 weeks after June entered the hospital with pneumonia, Valerie removed 3 boxes of first edition books from the house. She told the neighbor they were items June had promised the family. The books included a signed Toni Morrison novel, a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, and a set of Oz books Martin had collected. June had discussed donating some to the Library Foundation, but had completed no transfer. I learned about the removal from a child who asked why the locked glass cabinet was empty. Valerie said she moved the books for safekeeping. I requested an inventory. She said my concern proved I cared more about objects than June's health. June died on April 22nd. Her funeral took place at the Methodist church where she had taught Sunday school. Valerie organized the meal, printed photographs, and placed herself beside the guest book. My mother said we should be grateful someone had the energy to manage details. I delivered a reading from a letter June wrote to former students and returned to work the next day because the new fiscal year order deadline did not move for grief. Miriam Cole, June's attorney and named personal representative, mailed the first notice on April 28th. She used my parents' address from an old contact sheet because it appeared in one of June's paper files. The letter required my signature. Valerie was at Mom's house when the carrier attempted delivery on May 6. She wrote moved, address unknown, and returned it. She knew where I lived. 3 days earlier, she had asked me to locate replacement copies of books for Cody's son and sent the request through a delivery app that displayed my address. On May 19th, Valerie told my mother June's will probably left everything to charity. She said lawyers might contact relatives only to prevent later complaints, and urged everyone not to involve me because I became attached to symbolic causes. Mom accepted the explanation. No one called. On June 2nd, Cody measured June's garage. Valerie had suggested the estate might sell the property to him below market value if the family moved quickly. Cody wanted workshop space for his landscaping business. He did not ask whether a beneficiary existed. He assumed Valerie knew. The second certified notice went to my parents' house in July. Valerie again marked it returned. Miriam then searched public records, contacted the library's administration office, and requested address verification through lawful channels available to the estate. Samuel's substitute route carried the third letter directly to my apartment on August 14th, my birthday. The next morning, I entered Miriam's office with the envelope sealed inside a clear document sleeve. Her reception area smelled of coffee and old carpet. A wall clock clicked loudly enough to make the waiting room feel official. Miriam was 63, wore silver-framed glasses, and greeted me without the exaggerated sympathy people use when they expect grief to substitute for information. She verified my identity, copied the tracking history, and showed me the original will. June signed it 3 years earlier before 2 witnesses and an independent lawyer in Miriam's firm. Valerie was not present. The document named Miriam personal representative, left modest cash gifts to the library and church pantry, and devised the Sycamore Street house and contents to me. June added a memorandum asking that I consider preserving the front room for literacy work. The request was morally significant, but not a condition that would automatically take the house if I chose otherwise. Miriam emphasized that point. June trusted me to assess costs, law, and sustainability, rather than bind me to a sentimental promise. Miriam showed me the returned envelopes. Valerie's handwriting appeared on both. The first had no authority notation. The second asked future mail be sent in care of Valerie Morris. Valerie had never been appointed by the court and held no power of attorney after June's death. Then Miriam played a voice recording. June's voice was thinner than I remembered, but precise. She described my Saturday visits, the reading room, and her concern that family members viewed the house as unused wealth. She instructed Miriam to locate me independently if family mail became unreliable. She said Valerie was kind when kindness provided an audience, and controlling when control could be called help. I asked whether June had recorded the statement because she expected interference. Miriam said yes. June had seen the first editions moved once during an earlier hospital stay and returned only after she demanded them. She created a dated inventory with photographs, serial notes, and shelf locations. Miriam stored a copy. The hidden resource was not merely a recording favorable to me. It was June's habit of writing important kindness and important boundaries, so imperfect memory could not erase either. Miriam asked what I wanted done about the missing books. I said they should be returned and inventoried before anyone discussed accusation. She contacted Valerie through counsel, requested preservation of all estate property, and arranged new locks at the house. A court filing disclosed the notice history and my confirmed address. Samuel provided the official delivery record when requested through postal procedure. He did not speculate about Valerie's intent or my family. His limited evidence was useful because it did one job, established when and where delivery was attempted, and who signed or refused. I opened June's birthday note after leaving Miriam's office. I sat in my car beneath a sycamore tree whose leaves cast moving shadows across the windshield. The note said, "Attention is a form of shelter. You gave me shelter without making me small. Build only what can shelter others without destroying you." Below the sentence, she had drawn a crooked birthday candle. I cried until the windshield blurred, then drove to the library because Tuesday acquisitions reports still required approval. Grief and bureaucracy occupied the same day without canceling each other. If you are the person who remembers everyone else, ask yourself who notices when you stop supplying the reminders. Put one example in the comments, not as a test of love, but as evidence of where family labor has become automatic. Invisible systems cannot be changed until someone names them. The first probate meeting occurred on August 28th. Valerie arrived with my mother, Cody, and a blue folder labeled Family Property. She wore a cream blazer and carried the confidence of someone accustomed to entering a room first. Cody brought a measuring notebook from his landscaping business. Mom carried tissues. Valerie said she was relieved I had finally appeared. The phrase implied I had ignored the estate rather than received notice 12 days earlier. Miriam asked her to state how she knew prior letters had been sent. Valerie said Mom showed them to her because she managed family paperwork. Miriam placed the returned envelopes on the table. She asked whether the handwriting was Valerie's. Valerie said yes. She claimed she believed I had moved because my apartment was above a library building and sounded temporary. Miriam showed the address Valerie used for my graduation invitation and the message where she arranged a delivery to the same door. Valerie shifted to June's condition. She said June had become confused, attached herself to anyone who brought books, and made decisions no reasonable family could accept. Miriam asked whether Valerie had challenged June's capacity while she was alive. She had not. She had accepted June's permission to collect prescriptions and enter the home, but now treated the same period as incapable, only where the will excluded her. Mom said the family had assumed the house would help Cody because he had children and a business. I asked who promised that. She looked at Valerie. Valerie said June often spoke about keeping the property useful. Cody's garage plan, in their view, counted as useful. Miriam played 47 seconds of June's recording. June described my Saturday visits and said, "If Elena is not found through the family address, find her through the library. Do not let anyone say absence where there has been service." No one moved while the recording ended. The office ventilation pushed a corner of Mom's tissue packet. Cody looked down at his measuring notebook. Valerie stared at the recorder, as though the device had betrayed a private alliance. I placed the tracking histories beside the envelopes, and asked Valerie why she did not forward either notice. She said she was protecting June's estate from someone who appeared only when property was available. I reminded her June was already dead when both letters arrived. The protection she described operated against a beneficiary, not for a living elder. Miriam then displayed inventory photographs, showing the first editions on June's shelves 2 weeks before Valerie removed them. Valerie admitted taking the books, but said June had verbally promised them to family. She could identify no specific recipient, date, or witness. She had stored the boxes in a climate-controlled unit registered to her husband's company. The court later ordered their return pending administration. Valerie brought them to Miriam's office in the same boxes, each sealed with tape. One dust jacket had been damaged by packing. The loss was small in monetary terms and permanent in material terms. June had spent years teaching me that carelessness often hides behind the claim that an object is only a thing. Cody admitted he measured the garage after Valerie suggested a discounted sale. He had not paid for an appraisal, title search, or legal advice. His plan lived entirely in family expectation. He apologized to me before the meeting ended, but the apology focused on embarrassment, rather than the assumption that my unmarried life made the house less useful in my hands. Mom blamed Valerie for managing the mail. Valerie blamed Mom for giving permission. Cody blamed both women for making the sale sound settled. The returned envelopes narrowed each explanation. Mom had neglected to call despite seeing estate mail. Valerie had physically returned notice she knew could reach me. Cody had prepared to benefit without verifying ownership. Their actions were connected and not identical. I did not treat Mom's forgotten birthday as equal to Valerie's interference. One exposed emotional neglect. The other altered the estate's attempts to provide legal notice. Combining them into a single accusation would have made both less precise. After the meeting, Mom followed me into the parking lot and said she had been overwhelmed by June's funeral. I asked whether grief prevented her from mentioning 2 certified letters over 3 months. She said Valerie assured her the lawyer had my address elsewhere. I asked why she accepted that while watching Valerie mark me unknown. Mom said families sometimes simplify things to avoid conflict. That simplification made me disappear, I said. She cried. I did not apologize for the sentence. Cody called that evening and wished me a belated happy birthday. He said he had placed the date in his phone. I told him a phone reminder could address forgetting, but not the pattern where he contacted me primarily for help. He became defensive and listed times he had invited me to his children's events. I asked how many invitations included a request to bring, edit, arrange, or supervise something. He stopped speaking. Our relationship did not change because I delivered one perfect explanation. It changed because I stopped answering every request while the larger conversation remained unfinished. Estate administration took 9 months. The house required appraisal, title work, insurance, utility transfer, tax accounting, and inventory. June had no mortgage, but owed medical bills and property taxes. The cash estate covered most obligations, although selling a small investment account was necessary. The house could not become a reading center merely because everyone liked the idea. I assembled a feasibility plan with the same discipline I used for library acquisitions. Zoning allowed limited community use but required occupancy review. Insurance for children entering the property cost more than residential coverage. The roof had 12 to 15 years of life. The electrical panel needed replacement. Accessibility improvements would require a ramp and restroom modifications. Volunteer goodwill could not substitute for governance. I consulted a nonprofit attorney, an insurance broker, the city planning office, and directors of 2 literacy programs. The estimated first-year operating cost was $84,000, excluding major renovation. June left the house, not an endowment. I could sell it, live there, rent it, or build a sustainable organization. Sentiment did not select among those options. The library board expressed interest, but could not assume responsibility for a separate building outside its capital plan. A local community foundation offered fiscal sponsorship if we raised 2 years of operating reserves. A retired principal named Dr. Lorna Hayes volunteered to lead program design. She had worked with June and understood that after-school care required background checks, attendance procedures, emergency plans, and relationships with parents. We formed the Sycamore Reading House as a nonprofit with 5 independent directors. I served as one director, not sole controller. The house would remain in my name until the organization met defined financial and governance milestones. If it failed, I retained the option to sell rather than carry indefinite costs in secret. That structure honored June's request without turning me into another woman whose private labor made a public service look free. Valerie opposed the nonprofit at first. She told relatives I was using June's name to build status. The accusation resembled her earlier claim that I appeared for property. Any action I took could be rewritten as self-interest because the story protected her original conduct. I stopped responding to character theories and answered only specific factual questions. At a family dinner in October, Valerie said the reading house would attract strangers and lower neighborhood property values. June's front room had welcomed neighborhood children for 20 years. The strangers she feared were the same people June considered neighbors. I asked whether Valerie wanted to join a public planning session and submit concerns in writing. She declined. Influence felt less attractive when it entered a process visible to everyone. Mom apologized for forgetting my birthday 3 weeks late. She brought a grocery store cake with my name misspelled Elena as Elena. The error would have been funny under different conditions. She began explaining that August had been chaotic. I told her I did not need a defense of the calendar. I needed our relationship to stop depending on me to remind her I existed. She asked what that meant practically. I said I would no longer organize every family birthday, appointment, and holiday. Each adult could maintain a calendar. I would attend when invited and help when I freely chose. I would not be the infrastructure everyone praised only after it failed. The first test came with Dad's cardiology appointment. Mom texted asking whether I remembered the date. I replied that the clinic portal and printed card contained it. She called the answer cold. I resisted the impulse to look it up. Dad attended on time because Mom called the clinic herself. The world did not collapse when I stopped remembering for them. Cody missed a deadline for his son's scholarship application because he sent the essay to me 6 hours before it closed, and I was running a nonprofit planning meeting. I told him I could review it the next morning, which was too late. He became angry and said family should make time for children. I asked why the child's father had not made time earlier. The question ended our call. His son submitted the essay without my edits and received the scholarship. That outcome taught Cody more than my assistants would have. Competence grew where rescue did not arrive automatically. The reading house renovation began in January. Volunteers removed worn carpet and found oak flooring beneath it. An electrician replaced the panel. A contractor built a ramp along the side yard. We preserved Martin's shelves, repairing joints, and adding wall anchors. The work smelled of sawdust, plaster, and the lemon oil June used on wood. I found a pressed sycamore leaf inside a book June had given me after college. Her note described careful attention as a kind of shelter. I framed the leaf near the front door after the nonprofit board approved the display. Even sentiment required permission once the house belonged to a public mission. Valerie's conduct produced formal consequences. The probate court required an accounting of items she removed and ordered reimbursement for the damaged dust jacket's conservation treatment. The amount was $420. The number mattered less than the record establishing that family access did not authorize private distribution. Miriam declined to seek punitive sanctions because the books were returned and the estate's main loss was delay. She documented the notice interference in the final accounting. Valerie called the resolution humiliating. I did not publish it. Public embarrassment came from her own explanations to relatives, not from an exposure campaign by me. Mom wanted me to forgive Valerie before Christmas. I said forgiveness was not an event she could schedule to restore holiday seating. I would be civil at shared gatherings. Valerie would not handle my mail, documents, keys, or financial information. That was not revenge. It was a boundary tied to the conduct. The first program at Sycamore Reading House opened the following August, 2 days before my 37th birthday. We served 24 children in 2 afternoon groups. The schedule included reading support, homework time, snacks, and supervised internet access. Parents signed enrollment forms, volunteers completed background checks. A paid program coordinator handled daily operations. I kept my library job. The nonprofit did not become a stage where I performed June's sacrifice. I attended board meetings, selected books with program staff, and volunteered one Saturday each month. The structure prevented the mission from consuming the life it was meant to enrich. Samuel Price attended the opening with his daughter. He remembered the certified letter only after I mentioned it privately. I thanked him again. He said delivery was his job. That ordinary answer was part of the story's moral weight. He did not need to know the envelope's value to respect the process that placed it in my hand. Miriam donated June's voice recordings to the Reading House archive after the estate closed and the board adopted privacy rules. We used one brief excerpt at the opening. June said children did not need adults who promised to save them. They needed adults who noticed when they returned. Cody brought his children. He had stopped asking me to manage their applications and began attending parent workshops himself. He volunteered to repair the backyard fence under a written scope approved by the board. When he completed the work, the nonprofit paid his materials and thanked him publicly. Family contribution became service rather than a claim on the property. Mom sat in June's old chair during the opening and cried. Later she said she had believed a house should remain with people raising children, because that seemed like the most productive use. She had overlooked the fact that I had spent years working with children whose parents needed community support. Her definition of family usefulness had been narrowed to marriage and biological descendants. I told her the house was not proof that my life was more valuable than Cody's. It was June's property, directed by June, and then managed through a plan. Inheritance did not need to correct every family bias to be valid. My 37th birthday arrived with messages from Mom at 7:03, Cody at 7:14, Dad at 8:20, and Valerie at noon. I did not rank them. At work, my colleagues placed cinnamon tea and a single cupcake on my desk. The Reading House children made a card with 24 different spellings of my name. The certified envelope remained in a fireproof box with the will and final estate papers. June's handwritten note stayed in my wallet until the fold began weakening. A conservator at the state archive helped me create a protective sleeve. I placed the original in the box and carried a copy. The envelope's meaning changed. At first, it represented proof that my family allowed me to become unreachable while knowing exactly where I lived. During probate, it became evidence of interference and sequence. After the Reading House opened, it represented a route independent of family permission. June had anticipated imperfect memory and built another way for her intention to travel. The nonprofit plan nearly failed before renovation began. Our first insurance quote was more than twice what I had budgeted because the agent classified the Reading House as unsupervised youth care. Dr. Hayes corrected the program description, documented ratios, and found a broker experienced with educational nonprofits. The lower premium still required us to raise an additional $18,000. I resisted asking the public for money because I feared relatives would say I had inherited a house and immediately begun soliciting attention. Dr. Hayes told me fundraising existed to support a mission, not to protect a founder from gossip. We created a transparent campaign with a budget, board oversight, and a promise that no donor would receive naming control over the house. The Library Foundation provided a challenge grant. Former students of June sent checks ranging from $10 to $5,000. One woman in Oregon wrote that June had kept her after school during a year when home was unsafe. A retired mechanic donated shelving lumber because Martin once helped him pass a night class. The contributions revealed a network June never advertised. Valerie said the campaign proved the estate should have sold the house instead of asking strangers for money. She ignored that the board, not I, had chosen the campaign after reviewing sale and rental alternatives. I invited her to read the feasibility report. She replied that family matters should not require reports. Her sentence explained why the returned envelopes mattered. She preferred authority that operated through proximity and confidence. A report allowed people outside the family hierarchy to examine assumptions. Miriam's final inventory uncovered additional items Valerie had removed: a silver tea service, 2 quilts, and a box of Martin's tools. Valerie said she distributed them according to conversations she remembered with June. 1 quilt had gone to Mom. The tools were in Cody's garage. Neither recipient knew the estate had not authorized distribution. I could have demanded every object be physically returned. Miriam recommended a more proportionate process. An appraiser valued the items. Mom returned the quilt because she wanted no question attached to it. Cody returned the tools. Valerie returned the tea service after using it at a bridal shower. The estate recorded condition and value. The second quilt had been given to a distant relative who lived 6 hours away and had already paid to restore damaged stitching. June had indeed told the woman years earlier that she wanted her to have it, although no formal gift had occurred. I agreed, with court approval and the other required estate process, that the relative could purchase it from the estate for the appraised value reduced by documented conservation expense. Justice did not require ripping an object away from the person June likely intended merely to punish Valerie's method. That decision angered Valerie. She said I followed rules selectively. Miriam explained that fiduciary administration allowed evaluation of evidence and lawful agreement. It did not require pretending every informal promise was either automatically binding or automatically worthless. Procedure was not a machine that eliminated judgment. It was a structure that made judgment accountable. Mom began meeting with a counselor at her church after admitting that Valerie's efficiency had felt like relief. Dad's health had declined, Cody's business struggled, and Mom was tired of being the person who coordinated older relatives. Valerie stepped in and asked for no explicit authority at first. By the time estate mail arrived, Mom had become accustomed to handing her decisions she did not want to make. Understanding that dependency softened some of my anger without erasing Mom's choice. She could have sent a photograph of the envelope. She could have called Miriam. She could have written my address. Instead, she watched Valerie make me absent, because conflict with Valerie felt harder than silence toward me. Mom practiced direct contact through small tasks. She called the pharmacy herself. She entered birthdays into a paper calendar and a phone. She asked Dad what support he wanted rather than assigning me. When she forgot my library award ceremony the following spring, she apologized on the same day and did not attach an explanation. The absence of defense made the apology easier to receive. Dad's role had been quieter. He did not handle the estate mail, but he lived in the house where the envelopes arrived. He admitted seeing one on the counter. He assumed Mom would manage it, because family correspondence had always been her responsibility. His passivity was culturally familiar enough to escape notice. Women organized, men believed organization simply occurred. I asked him whether he knew my address. He recited it correctly. That answer hurt more than if he had forgotten. He possessed the information but did not see himself as the person responsible for using it. After that conversation, Dad began sending his own cards. They arrived early, usually with too much postage because he distrusted the scale at the grocery kiosk. He wrote short messages about weather, baseball, and what he had repaired. The cards were imperfect attempts to become a participant rather than a beneficiary of Mom's reminders. Cody's change involved money. He had assumed a discounted sale of June's garage could solve his business storage problem. Once that option disappeared, he leased a smaller commercial space and adjusted his equipment schedule. The solution cost him more each month, but it separated his company from family property he did not own. He later admitted that Valerie's suggestion appealed because it made his need look like June's intention. He did not think of himself as stealing. He thought of himself as the relative with children and employees, therefore the person whose use carried more social weight. My life, because it lacked a spouse and children, appeared available for service without requiring assets. I told him the hierarchy had shaped our entire adulthood. His deadlines became family emergencies. My commitments remained flexible, because no child would be disappointed if I canceled. The reading house made the contradiction visible. Work with 24 children could still be treated as less real than helping one nephew revise an essay at midnight. Cody asked what repair would look like. I said I wanted invitations that did not contain assignments. I wanted him to call before a crisis. I wanted him to learn the systems he repeatedly asked me to navigate. He began by attending a financial aid webinar with his daughter, instead of forwarding the registration email to me. At the next family barbecue, he brought potato salad and no forms. The absence was small enough that nobody else noticed. I noticed it. Valerie's relationship with the rest of the family became unstable after the probate record narrowed her explanations. Some relatives treated her as a villain because that allowed them to forget how readily they had accepted her version. I refused to lead an exile campaign. She could attend public family events. She could not act as anyone's undocumented agent in matters involving me or the reading house. One aunt accused me of enjoying Valerie's humiliation. I asked which action of mine she considered humiliating: preserving returned envelopes, requesting estate inventory, or declining private settlement without court notice. She said my calm made everything feel intentional. I told her calm was not evidence of cruelty, any more than tears were evidence of innocence. Valerie eventually sent a 4-page letter. The first 2 pages described years of caring for relatives who rarely thanked her. The third said June had often criticized my limited schedule and praised Valerie's availability. The final page admitted she returned the notices because she believed I would turn the house into a public project and receive admiration while Valerie's practical care disappeared. That admission was more honest than her courtroom explanations. Envy did not excuse interference, but it identified the wound she used to justify it. She had carried real labor and converted lack of recognition into permission to redirect someone else's inheritance. I answered once. I acknowledged the groceries, rides, meals, and funeral work she provided. I said those contributions deserved gratitude and, where appropriate, reimbursement. They did not create authority to return my mail, remove property, or decide which life counted as real family. I offered mediation if she wanted a structured conversation. Valerie declined again. The Reading House Board created a volunteer recognition policy, partly because of Valerie's letter. Hours were tracked. Expenses could be reimbursed. Roles had limits. Volunteers received annual statements of service. We did not rely on invisible devotion until resentment created a private claim on assets or decisions. Dr. Hayes said institutions often repeat family mistakes at larger scale. The most dependable person becomes the unofficial memory, emergency contact, and cleaner. Everyone praises her commitment until she leaves, and the organization discovers no one knows the passwords. We documented procedures because gratitude alone was not succession planning. My acquisitions department needed the same correction. I had become the only employee who knew several vendor renewal histories. After the birthday experience, I created shared notes and trained 2 colleagues. At first, the transfer made me feel replaceable. Then I understood that indispensability had become another version of the family calendar. Healthy systems preserve knowledge without trapping one person inside it. A storm damaged the Reading House roof during renovation. Water entered the back bedroom and soaked boxes of ordinary paperbacks awaiting review. The first editions were already in secure storage. Volunteers wanted to save every book. I assessed mold risk, replacement cost, and labor. We discarded damaged common titles, conserved a few books containing June's notes, and ordered replacements. The decision upset one donor who believed throwing away books contradicted our mission. I explained that libraries and reading programs protect access, not every physical copy. Some objects can be replaced. Others carry unique evidence. Knowing the difference prevents sentiment from consuming resources needed by living readers. That principle applied to family traditions too. I stopped hosting the annual holiday cookie exchange after realizing I performed nearly all shopping, invitations, cleanup, and dietary planning. Mom feared the tradition would disappear. Valerie did not volunteer. Cody suggested rotating houses. The exchange moved to his home, became smaller, and survived. I attended with 1 tin of cookies and left before cleanup because I had an early shift. No one called me selfish. The world adjusted after a brief period of inconvenience. My 37th birthday celebration at the Reading House was not a surprise party. I disliked the idea that public appreciation should compensate for private neglect. The board scheduled the opening based on construction, permits, and school calendars. Colleagues happened to bring a cupcake because they knew the date. The distinction kept June's gift from becoming a fairy tale reward for being forgotten. After the opening, a local newspaper published an article titled "Librarian Inherits House, Gives It to Children." The headline was inaccurate. I had not yet transferred title to the nonprofit, and the operating structure included safeguards. I asked for a correction because romantic simplification could create false expectations and governance problems. The reporter said the original headline attracted readers. I told her attention was not harmless when it replaced legal reality. The newspaper corrected the online version to Inherited House Becomes Community Reading Program under new nonprofit. The second headline was less elegant and more true. Valerie shared the original article with a comment, saying some people knew how to turn inheritance into sainthood. I did not respond publicly. The board minutes, title records, financial statements, and correction existed. A social media argument would have converted accountable work back into competing personalities. The nonprofit reached its 2-year reserve target 18 months after opening. At that point, I transferred the house to the organization under a deed containing restrictions approved by council. If the nonprofit dissolved, the property or sale proceeds would pass to another literacy organization rather than return to me or my relatives. I received no tax benefit beyond what the law allowed and no right to live there. Signing that deed changed the symbolic weight of June's gift. The house had first arrived as an inheritance addressed to me. I chose to place it into a structure capable of carrying her intention beyond my own lifespan. Unlike Mom's mishandled mail, the transfer occurred with advice, disclosure, and records available to every director. Miriam attended the signing. She brought the original certified envelope in its evidence sleeve after receiving court permission to release estate records to me. The green label had faded slightly. She said June would have appreciated that the paper traveled through 3 failed attempts: probate, renovation, and final conveyance, without losing its sequence. I did not display the envelope at the reading house. Children did not need my family conflict built into the institution's origin story. I stored it privately. The public plaque named June and Martin, the volunteers, and the neighborhood partners. My name appeared in board records where accountability required it. The reading house encountered ordinary problems after the inspiring opening. 2 volunteers quit. A grant application failed. A parent objected to a young adult novel. A pipe froze over winter break. 1 child stole snacks because food at home was uncertain. These events mattered because they tested whether the project could function without relying on my emotional attachment to June. The program coordinator handled volunteer schedules. The board followed a materials review policy. A plumber repaired the pipe under contract. Staff connected the child's family with food assistance without publicly labeling him. The organization survived through procedures as well as kindness. I learned that attention as shelter requires boundaries. A shelter with no capacity limit collapses. A volunteer who never rests becomes unreliable. A founder who answers every question prevents staff from developing judgment. June's note warned me not to build something that destroyed me, and the warning proved as important as the gift. At the library, children began recognizing me from the newspaper. One asked whether I was rich because I inherited a house. I told her property could be valuable while also requiring taxes, repairs, insurance, and decisions. She said that sounded like owning a dog. The comparison was not legally accurate, but its practical insight made me laugh. My family's birthday habits improved unevenly. Mom remembered most years and once sent a card to my old address, despite having the correct one. Dad mailed early. Cody set calendar reminders. Valerie sent no message for 3 years. Her silence was easier than a greeting used to test whether access had returned. On my 40th birthday, Valerie appeared at the public reading house anniversary event. She stood near the back during a student poetry program and left before refreshments. A week later, the nonprofit received an anonymous donation matching the cost of the damaged first edition dust jacket. The board treasurer knew the bank record, but maintained donor privacy under policy. I suspected the gift came from Valerie. Suspicion did not entitle me to transform it into reconciliation. I let the donation remain what the record said, anonymous support. Mom and I developed a new birthday ritual. We met for breakfast in the week of each birthday, rather than staging surprise expectations. The person being celebrated chose the restaurant. No one organized a group text. The routine was modest and reciprocal. When Mom turned 70, I brought flowers but did not coordinate the entire family. Cody handled invitations. Dad reserved the room. Shared labor made affection easier to believe. Dad died 2 years after the reading house opened. His estate was simple, yet Mom immediately asked Miriam for advice about notice and records. She did not allow Valerie to manage mail. Every beneficiary received direct certified communication. The experience did not eliminate grief. It prevented grief from becoming another excuse for informal authority. At Dad's funeral, Valerie and I exchanged a brief greeting. She did not organize the meal. A church committee did. Without a role that made her indispensable, she seemed uncertain where to stand. I understood the loneliness beneath that uncertainty, because I had once built identity around being the family calendar. Recognizing similarity did not require restoring trust. Months later, she accepted mediation. The mediator asked each of us what we wanted that the other person could realistically provide. Valerie wanted acknowledgement that she had cared for June during weekdays, and that my eventual project drew public praise from labor she considered unseen. I acknowledged both facts. I wanted her to state plainly that returning the letters and removing estate property were choices, not protective misunderstandings. She did. She said she believed the family would support her, and that I would be too conflict-averse to challenge the sequence once the house was sold. The admission hurt because it accurately described the version of me she expected. I told her she had mistaken quietness for an empty place where consent should be. We reached a limited agreement. She would not contact the nonprofit staff about family disputes, represent herself as June's intended administrator, or handle my mail. I would not oppose her attendance at public programs or repeat probate details for social punishment. We did not promise closeness. After mediation, Valerie sent me a birthday card for the first time in 5 years. It contained no explanation and no request. I placed it in a drawer rather than on display. Trust returned, if it returned at all, through repeated conduct too small to announce. June's first editions eventually went to a university special collection under a long-term loan from the nonprofit. Scholars and local students could request access. High-quality facsimiles remained in the Reading House cabinet. The arrangement protected the objects while preserving their connection to the community. Cody objected initially because he believed valuable books should be sold to fund programs. The board compared sale, insurance, conservation, and educational options. The loan created public access and reduced environmental risk without liquidating the collection. Cody accepted the decision after seeing the analysis. His willingness to be persuaded by a process marked a change from measuring the garage before knowing the owner. The annual report listed every restricted gift, major expense, program outcome, and board member. I insisted on publishing compensation for the program coordinator and contractors, because community projects often hide labor beneath the word volunteer. Some donors complained that administration consumed money. Dr. Hayes explained that background checks, insurance, training, payroll, utilities, and oversight were part of keeping children safe. June had run the front room informally because she was one woman serving a smaller number of known families. Expanding the idea responsibly required different infrastructure. Honoring a legacy did not mean freezing its methods in 1998. My career advanced too. I became system-wide collection manager and negotiated digital access agreements for 4 counties. The promotion required travel and would once have made me anxious about family logistics. I accepted without arranging substitute reminders for Mom and Cody. Adults maintained their own calendars while I attended vendor meetings in Chicago and Denver. In one airport, I passed a postal counter displaying green certified mail forms. The color brought me back to Samuel under the porch light. I realized the stranger at my door had become symbolic in family retellings. Mom said, "The mailman saved the house." That was not accurate. Samuel completed a delivery. Miriam preserved procedure. June documented intent. I opened the envelope and acted. Justice was distributed across ordinary duties performed correctly. That distinction protected the story from becoming magic. Systems fail when people interfere, but systems can also create alternate routes when intimacy proves unreliable. A tracking number did not love me. It established sequence. The fact that sequence mattered was enough. A graduate student later interviewed me about community literacy. She asked whether being forgotten on my birthday motivated the nonprofit. I told her it had not. June's years of work motivated it. The birthday sharpened my understanding of attention, but did not create the mission. Pain can reveal a need without becoming the institution's permanent fuel. I refused to build a program that required me to remain wounded in order to justify it. Children deserved a reading house, not a shrine to my neglect. On the 5th anniversary, the porch light was replaced with an energy-efficient fixture that created the same amber circle over the mailbox. The brass mailbox remained, polished by volunteers. A child dropped a thank you note inside for the program coordinator. The envelope was addressed correctly and delivered 10 feet through a front hall. I stood on the sidewalk after the event and watched families leave. No one knew where my family had sent the first estate notices. That privacy felt like completion. The harm had been documented where it mattered and released where it did not. When I returned home, 3 birthday cards waited on my table because the anniversary again fell near the date. One came from Mom, one from Cody's daughter, and one from a former reading club student now studying education. I opened them without using the number as a score. Attention became less convincing when measured by a single day. I looked for patterns. Who contacted me without needing service? Who accepted no? Who learned my actual work? Who remembered an address after being corrected? The family improved in some places and remained limited in others. That was more believable than a complete transformation. The certified envelope still carries a stiff fold where I gripped it in the rain. The tracking strip remains legible. I no longer need to look at it to remember that my name reached me after 2 people tried to redirect it. I keep it because records are not resentment. Sometimes they are the boundary between what occurred and what a family later finds comfortable to recall. One winter evening, a 9-year-old named Darius remained at the reading house after pickup time. His mother's phone went directly to voicemail. Under June's informal system, she might have driven him home herself. Our policy required 2 staff members to remain, document contact attempts, use emergency numbers, and involve appropriate services only if necessary. The coordinator reached an aunt after 40 minutes. Darius ate crackers and read a graphic novel while he waited. Nothing dramatic occurred, which was the point. Good procedure kept one child's ordinary family delay from becoming either neglect theater or an unsafe favor. I thought about how my own family had treated information. Valerie saw procedure as an obstacle to instinct. Mom viewed direct notice as something a trusted relative could simplify. The reading house taught us that care became more dependable when no single person could quietly decide what another person needed to know. The board conducted an annual review of conflicts of interest. I disclosed that Cody's landscaping company might bid on yard maintenance. He submitted a written proposal alongside 2 competitors, and I left the room during discussion. His bid was not the lowest, but it included snow removal and emergency tree service that gave it the best overall value. The board selected him without my vote. Cody later said the process felt insulting at first. Then he realized winning through comparison protected him from relatives claiming I handed him work. Formal distance preserved both the nonprofit and his dignity. Valerie attended a volunteer orientation the next spring. The coordinator, who knew only the public background, assigned her to book cleaning under supervision. Valerie followed sign-in rules, completed a background check, and did not attempt to direct staff. I saw her twice and spoke briefly. The smallness of the contact was appropriate. During one shift, she found a note June had written inside a donated dictionary. Do not confuse the person who carries the key with the person who owns the room. Valerie showed it to the coordinator, who placed it in the archive. She did not send it to me as a coded apology. Restraint gave the discovery more integrity. My mother eventually volunteered too, but she chose snack preparation rather than scheduling. She said calendars now made her nervous. I told her a task could be chosen without becoming a permanent identity. She served twice a month and declined during Dad's illness without the program collapsing. That was the culture I wanted June's house to model. People could contribute substantially without earning ownership of everyone else's choices. They could step back without causing an emergency. Their names could be remembered even when no one needed a favor that day. The experience changed how I celebrated my own birthday. I began inviting 4 or 5 people to breakfast and telling them directly that I wanted their company. I stopped constructing secret tests where silence would prove a fear. A boundary is not the same as withholding information to measure whether others can guess it. My family had genuinely failed me at 36, but I had also expected mind reading because asking to be celebrated felt like manufacturing affection. June's letter taught me that important kindness could be written without becoming less sincere. I learned to state a desire and then observe how people responded. On my 41st birthday, I told Mom, Cody, 2 friends, and the reading house director that I would be at a cafe from 9 until 11. Everyone came except Cody, whose truck broke down. He called before the breakfast began and arrived later with grease on his hands. The morning was not more authentic because no one had been reminded. It was authentic because the invitation was honest, and the responses were voluntary. I still refused the old role of universal calendar. Asking for my own celebration did not require resuming responsibility for everyone else's. Mutuality grew when each person carried both the desire to be remembered and the work of maintaining relationships. The green certified mail label faded further each year. Miriam suggested making a high-resolution scan, so the estate archive preserved both sides and the tracking number. The physical envelope could eventually deteriorate without taking the evidence with it. Preservation, like family repair, depended on separating meaning from one fragile object. I gave the scan to the nonprofit archive, with access restricted during my lifetime. Future researchers might care about June's estate planning and the house's transition. They did not need immediate access to the names of living relatives involved in the dispute. Transparency and privacy were not opposites when rules defined their boundaries. Samuel retired from the Postal Service 3 years after the opening. The Reading House children made him cards because he had begun attending public events with his daughter. None mentioned that he delivered an inheritance. They thanked him for showing them how addresses, routes, and zip codes worked during a career day visit. At his retirement reception, he said the most important mail was often impossible to identify from the outside. Carriers delivered jury summonses, birthday cards, medical bills, apologies, and advertisements in the same weather. Their duty was not to decide which envelope deserved a person. It was to complete the route. That principle became another moral anchor for me. Valerie believed she could inspect the likely meaning of estate mail and decide I should not receive it. My family often inspected my needs the same way, assuming the independent daughter required less attention. Respect began by allowing information, invitations, and affection to reach the named person before anyone else edited their value. The Reading House eventually added a small mailbox writing project. Children practiced addressing envelopes to grandparents, deployed parents, authors, and their future selves. Staff taught where the return address belonged and why legible names mattered. The exercise looked quaint beside tablets and video calls, yet students understood that a physical letter created a route another person could verify. One child addressed hers to "Me when I think nobody remembers." She asked us to mail it on her 15th birthday. The program could not promise storage for 6 years without a system, so the coordinator created consent forms, digital backups, and an annual verification process. A tender idea became sustainable only after someone built the unromantic structure around it. I watched the first stack leave in a postal tray and thought about June. She had not trusted memory alone. She had trusted counsel, witnesses, recordings, inventory, and a delivery method that recorded attempts. Her affection for me was personal. The route she built for it was procedural. That combination became the inheritance more durable than brick. Care did not lose warmth when it acquired dates, addresses, and responsibilities. It became harder for a confident relative to intercept. My relationship with Mom settled into something smaller and more direct. We spoke twice a week instead of through constant task messages. Some calls lasted only 10 minutes. When she needed help, she said what she needed and accepted that I might decline. When I needed company, I asked without attaching a problem as justification. The first time I called simply because a difficult day at work had left me lonely, Mom sounded surprised. She listened and did not offer me a form to complete or a relative to rescue. Our conversation did not repair every forgotten occasion. It created one new memory in which I arrived as a daughter rather than a service. The final estate accounting showed no hidden fortune. After bills, taxes, repairs, legal fees, and nonprofit startup costs I voluntarily contributed, the house remained the primary asset. Its appraised value was significant, but its use required continuing money. The reality made Valerie's scheme look both more serious and less glamorous. She had interfered for a property that came with obligations she never inventoried. Justice did not arrive when I inherited a house on a forgotten birthday. An inheritance is not compensation for emotional neglect. Justice arrived when the returned mail, recordings, inventory, and court process prevented private assumptions from replacing June's written choice. My family's forgetting still hurt. I stopped pretending the certified letter erased it. A stranger doing his job did not become a substitute family member. He became evidence that care can exist in procedure, even when intimacy fails. The sentence I carried from the experience was this: being useful to everyone does not guarantee anyone will remember you when no task is attached. I had mistaken dependence for attention. My family contacted me often, but frequency had hidden the narrow reasons. I changed the relationship by becoming less automatically available, not by staging a disappearance. I answered when I wanted connection. I declined when the request belonged to someone else's planning. I invited relatives to the reading house, but did not assign them roles. I let birthdays become dates other adults had to remember without my assistance. Write below about the moment you discovered that being needed and being known were not the same thing. What did you stop organizing, reminding, or rescuing so the relationship had a chance to reveal its real shape? Your answer may help another dependable person recognize why constant contact still feels lonely. Pass this story to someone whose family treats her memory, planning, and emotional labor as a public utility. The first boundary may not be dramatic. It may be a calendar no longer maintained, a form returned unfinished, or a birthday allowed to arrive without self-announcement. Subscribe for more stories where records and restraint protect a person without turning pain into spectacle. My 36th birthday ended with no family cake. I ate toast over the sink, read June's note twice, and placed the certified envelope beneath a heavy dictionary so the rain would not curl it. A year later, children entered the Sycamore Street house carrying library cards, and every one of their names was checked against a list prepared by someone whose job was to notice they had arrived.